Welcome to the History Slam podcast from ActiveHistory.ca. Here is your host, Sean Graham.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome to the History Slam, everybody. I am Sean Graham, coming at you today. We're nearly live in Ottawa, Ontario, and it's finally here, the long-awaited, much-anticipated Prime Minister's Fantasy Draft. There have been 22 people who have held the office of Prime Minister in the history of this fine country, and today I have assembled the best and the brightest from the History Department, and let me introduce you to him now. Sitting to my immediate right, probably the favorite in the Prime Minister's Fantasy Draft, I think. Vegas has him at 5-2 odds today. Coming from a public policy background, Mike Thompson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And sitting to his immediate right, directly across from me, we welcome back to the podcast the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Aaron Boyce.
Thanks for letting me be here.
And sitting to his immediate right, my immediate left, the underdog. Although he never fits under anything, so I don't know why we can call him the underdog. Patrick Fournier, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, gentlemen, let's go over the rules real quick. So we're going to draft prime ministers. The rationale is completely up to you. Whatever you want. It can be for policy reasons, it can be for personal reasons, it can be for what they did as prime minister, what they did before they were prime minister, after prime minister, whatever you want. The rationale is yours. You simply have to explain yourself as to why you're picking that individual. We're going to have 4 rounds, and we're going to do a snake draft, meaning the person who goes first won't pick again until 8th, and then vice versa. So that's really the setup, and at the end of the podcast, we'll put it up on the website, and we'll let people vote and see who wins. And the stakes for winning is literally stakes. Yeah, it's we'll all go out as a celebratory event after this is posted, and the winner gets their
steak,
their food and libations paid for to a reasonable degree.
That's crazy.
Let's say that. So that's the setup. Is what we're going to do today. Now, in what I guarantee to all the listeners out there was not fixed. I have the first pick, which I'm very excited about. I wanted the first pick because there's really only one prime minister who I really want, and I'm thrilled that I got the number 1 pick because I don't even know what your guys' ranking was, but he was my clear number 1. It's a guy who tailored everything he did to public opinion. He loved his mother. He loved his dog. Saw a psychic. Dominated the conscription crisis during the Second World War. Left an amazing diary, perhaps the greatest historical document in the history of this country.
An awesome cottage.
Very nice cottage, great resort today.
That he left to Canada.
He's a fine individual, number 1 overall pick, William Lyon Mackenzie King.
Not surprising.
Yeah. With you and your love of the BBC, of the CBC.
Seriously?
Yeah, he did, yes. He founded founded. There's argument and debate, but yes, the CBC started under Mackenzie King's watch. And yes, I am definitely biased in that.
I did not put it on my list because I knew you were going to pick him up. So
yeah,
you didn't even have it as an option.
No. It was a handout to you on my part.
But what if you picked first, Pat?
Yeah.
I would have picked someone else.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
He's not even on my list.
So he didn't make your top 16.
No, exactly. This is Sean Graham. This is my gift to you.
Oh, thank you.
This is the kind of person I am.
But am I off on having him as 1? I think he's clear 1.
Oh, yeah.
It's not unsurprising that he goes first. I think overall,
I think
longest-serving prime minister.
I see him definitely he's definitely a first-round pick, no matter what.
Oh, yeah.
There's no doubt about that. I would have been really surprised if he had gone second round. I mean, first overall, as in the best prime minister ever. I mean, obviously that's debatable, and that'll be up to the listeners to decide if you're right or not. But I mean, he's a solid choice.
So there's my pick, number 1 overall. So William Lyon Mackenzie King off the board. And we go to the number 2 overall pick, and that honor goes to Michael Thompson.
My first pick is somebody I lived quite close to, actually, in Sandy Hill. Just across the street from me. You can find his house.
Wow.
On a street named after him. This is first French-Canadian Prime Minister. Expert of the compromise. He's been called charming, imaginative, intellectual. I think he was capable of exercising power more than his critics initially gave him credit for. He was able to balance some of the contradictions of the love for Britain while also maintaining the the love for Canada as a country? Or is it the everlasting no policy? He managed English and French relations. His formula has been described as self-reliant, based on moderation, unity. So my first choice is Laurier.
Wilfrid Laurier.
Wilfrid
Very,
Laurier.
very good.
I am
choice.
surprised. I have to say, he wasn't a first round pick for me.
Really?
Really?
No, he wasn't.
Wow.
Not even. No, I have him in 6. I have him ranked 6 overall.
I support your choice because
Do
he's
you?
bald. I support bald people.
What I enjoyed, I found this out when I was doing research, though. He had a long-term affair.
Yeah.
Was married his whole life, and yet maintained this affair with a woman who was into politics. Whereas his wife didn't like politics.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those kind of strange things about Canadian history. I mean, the fact that he had this long-going affair. I mean, it's well known that U.S. presidents, it's almost unheard of if they don't have an affair. But I mean, for a Canadian figure, we don't generally think of these guys doing these things.
See, he seems to be the master of balance. He can balance the regions, he can balance the French and the English, he can balance the national unity and autonomy, while also balancing the sort of the love for the British Empire. So he's quite the skilled politician. I'm not going to make any comments about affairs and whatnot. I did not know that. It is not one of my rationales.
All right, that's fine. And we have to give a shout out to our own Cedric Brousseau for the Navy.
Yeah, I mean, even within the military, he made huge strides and accomplishments, not just the Navy, but also the Army. His list of accomplishments, I think, are long. I think skilled politician definitely deserves to go first round. And actually, I would have, if I had gone first, I was debating King, safe choice, or Laurier. Yeah. I would have taken. I came in here. I sat down. I was like, if I go first, I'm taking Laurier.
Wow! So you got your number one pick. Anyway.
I got my number one pick.
That's good.
Perfect.
And also won the most consecutive elections. I discovered.
Sure.
4 elections in a row. No one has ever done that. That's an impressive feat. So I didn't have him as a first round pick just because that's the way I think. But I can't really quibble too much. Solid choice.
Careful politics, not confrontation. That's his style. I like that.
There you go.
That's good stuff.
So as we move on then to the number 3 overall pick, we move across the table to the man, the myth, the legend.
All right. Well, first of all, I also had Mackenzie King and Laurier as first rounders, so I mean that's mine. But I'm also able to get my first round pick and my top choice, which is fantastic.
Wow.
For me, I'm moving into the first prime minister born in the 20th century. He was a dominant political figure throughout the 1960s all the way up until the 1980s. You either loved him or you hated him, is what I found out. He was a very polarizing figure. His positive aspects, he was very dedicated, he was passionate, he was a very educated man. But on the negative side, he could be seen as very arrogant. He was seen as disconnected sometimes, and he's been criticized for his poor economic handling of Canada. He was the man that was responsible for repatriating our Canadian Constitution, and I think one of my favorite things about this guy is during the handling of the October crisis. I mean, huge controversy right there. But for him to stand there on the steps of Parliament, some guy comes up and says, well, what are you willing to do? And he just stands there and looks at the guy and says, well, just watch me. I mean, that's arrogance personified, but that just takes guts to do. So, of course, my first overall pick is Pierre Trudeau.
Yeah. Good choice.
This was my first pick, unfortunately.
Well, good. I'm glad I sneaked that away from you, Pat.
I'm sure you are.
Again, I gotta say, I had him as number 5.
No,
I had him in first round, but I'm surprised that two of you had him as number 1.
Yeah, number 1
I
overall.
totally agree with Aaron.
You guys have never been west of Winnipeg, clearly.
He took Canada out of this very conservative rut and really propelled it into the 20th century.
Well, he made politics interesting for a lot of Canadians. The Trudeau mania of the late 1960s was just massive. It got tons of people involved.
all the social transformations that really transformed Canada from then on, like divorce laws and stuff like that. It really, I believe, really helped. When you have Fidel Castro attend your funeral, I mean,
that's boss.
That's pretty awesome.
That's pretty boss.
And if I can add something, I felt this is for me for being French Canadian.
Absolutely.
In between 92 and 94, there was a comedy show in Quebec where they had this character, this fake reporter, interview politicians. And this one particular comedian went up to Trudeau when he launched his autobiography and pretty much harassed Trudeau and try to make fun of him and everything. This characterizes Trudeau in my belief that he had the balls to really go for it. And he actually kicked this comedian in the balls. So after repeatedly being harassed by him in front of everybody, he just tried to rip off his fake beard and then kicked him in the balls.
That's a good rationale. Willingness to attack. Who was it the headlock?
That was Chrétien.
Yeah, Chrétien.
The
Shawinigan handshake.
Yeah.
That's if you go by that logic.
But I think for me, biased, living in the West, visit to Saskatoon, said, "Why should I sell your wheat?" Flipped off people on a train in British Columbia. You're alienating. You're alienating half the country. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean.
But like his vision for the country and to stand. I mean, like we said, he repatriate the Constitution, the Charter, rights and freedoms. I mean, those are huge, major accomplishments.
Favored bilingualism, multiculturalism. It's really important stuff.
Yeah.
In terms
Canada
of,
would not be what it is today.
Canada as a country, as a nation, it's interesting that he was divisive along sort of regional lines, yet everything he stood for was for unifying the country into sort of one.
Exactly.
Right.
So he really worked for Canada.
Really interesting guy, but I mean, you can't. I mean, obviously, he's super, super important.
Yeah.
So,
but is there
definitely first round worthy? Obviously.
Is there a disconnect though between his whole like participatory democracy and the just society, and then invoking the War Measures Act?
So I mean, everybody has stuff that.
Like those two things seem completely
War
divergent.
Measures is kind of excessive. I mean, for sure. No, I mean nobody is perfect. There's going to be good
William
points,
Lyon
bad
Mackenzie
points.
King is.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I guess we didn't criticize him at all, except for maybe
Because he's awesome.
Okay, wait.
But
let me go back for a second. He was kind of nuts, though. I mean, if he was talking,
That's part of the reason I picked him.
But that's for me. But I mean,
he goes to a psychic in Kingston. That's a
kinda,
win.
That's kind of crazy.
That's amazing. I love every part of it. But no, the Trudeau thing, I think there's a confusing aspect to his time as Prime Minister. There's this strange confrontation between what he says and what he does.
Well, for me, a lot of it is just his personality. Just as I said before, I mean, he really brought Canadian politics to the people and made it really interesting. And just the sound bites that this guy has, or things that he did throughout his life, are just incredible. I mean, one of the best things I think of is when he did a pirouette behind the Queen. I mean, who does that? Pierre Trudeau does that. I mean, he was just kind of all over the place, but he made sure that when he explained his ideas, he'd explain it very, very well. He was a very educated man. He knew what he was talking about. It's not as though he'd just fly off the seat of his pants, unless he said fuddle-duddle. That he allegedly said in Parliament. Again, he based everything on reason, and so that's why, for me, I just think that he personifies this idea of Canada and this direction that Canada has taken.
Yeah, and I will say this, that if you're going to have a Prime Minister on your team, and maybe you guys are going to go out for drinks, and you need a wingman, Trudeau.
Ultimate wingman.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimate wingman.
Yeah, that's who you want.
I don't know about that.
Not ultimate?
Out of all the Prime Ministers?
He would not be a good wingman.
Oh, but wait, no, you're right.
He would be what
that's true.
That's true.
You would be his wingman.
He would be like Barney.
Yeah, but nobody will draw more people, and he can't take them all. So do you have so much like?
I don't know about that. He was qualified as a swinger. So
no, I think you're right. I think he would have tried.
Would be a better wingman.
Out of the Prime Ministers, I don't think there is one.
That might come up later on.
You never know.
Who knows?
So we move on then to the final pick of the first round, and that goes to Mr. Fournier.
Okay, so since my pick was taken from me by Aaron Boyce
maliciously.
Oh yeah, no.
Maliciously,
with contempt, I took it from you.
Yeah, I could
Foresight
feel
and
that contempt. I will still stay in the same set of ideas, kind of, and I will go for what I qualify this Prime Minister to be: the guy next door. He's a simple man, yet he could be extremely ruthless. He was at the heart of sponsorship scandals, yet came completely unscathed. So my pick is Jean Chrétien, again, the inventor of the Shawinigan handshake. And
there's a
which
reason
I
right
think
there.
This is brilliant. And for any of you who may have witnessed, who have seen the hearings for the Gomery Commission, that guy was hilarious. He was simply brilliant. He talked for about 15 minutes about golf balls with the logo and the Canadian flag on them to explain what was going on. He was the head of the Liberal Party and kept saying he didn't know what was going on, and frankly, he didn't care. And still, that guy remain at the head of the nation for
10 years, right?
Full decade.
Yeah,
full
93 to
decade,
2003.
Yep.
Yeah, he gripped Bill Clinton by the throat, so I rest my case.
And he got pied by a protester
It's true.
in Charlottetown. So that's always a plus.
Between the winning and handshake and getting pied, it's like he's like you have his whole own episode of like Just for Laughs or something. You can just sit there and watch the outtakes, the Chrétien outtakes.
Well, the funny thing with that, I mean, Chrétien as well loved the media. I mean, he's been on how many CBC specials? And I remember watching Royal Canadian Air Farce as a kid and watching them parody Chrétien, and then lo and behold, he walks out and just joins in with it. And I mean, for me, I mean, I was a young kid at that time, but for me to see a prime minister come out there, you know, be able to take a few laughs and, you know, make a few jokes there, it just gave me huge respect for him.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he definitely had a sense of humor about himself because he had the Bell's palsy as a kid, which paralyzed the left side of his face. And I remember he used to say that he was a politician who didn't talk out of both sides of his mouth, which I think is pretty clever. And also, I will say this: he's not responsible for this, but it was kind of with him. Best line out of the Queen in the history of the Queen, where the Montreal DJ called the Queen and pretended to be him and started just talking about crazy stuff, like putting her face on Canadian Tire money, which prompted the Queen to tell Chrétien that I didn't think you sounded quite like yourself, but I thought, given all the duress you were under, you might have been drunk. Come on.
So that's what I mean. He really is the guy next door, and he was next door. You could just go up to him, to his house, knock on the doors, and you want to grab a beer, and
he'd go.
Might make some barbecue, and I think that's cool for a prime minister to have that detachment from your function, really be one of the people you represent, other than some other prime ministers who were elected, but they clearly felt that they were above everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Importance for me looking back on Chrétien is just when he was elected, 93, I was 11, and then he was prime minister for 10 years. So for me, when I think back of sort of my becoming more politically aware and politically conscious, and sort of as you grow up and go through high school and you become more aware of these things, he's that guy. So I always look back on him, not necessarily with like nostalgia, but it's just sort of important in that way, in that coming of age and sort of my political consciousness is always Chrétien's that guy.
For me, it was the in the aftermath of 9/11. I was 15 when that happened, but I mean, obviously the actions thereafter, Canada played a huge role in helping out New York lift through the rubble and such like that, and Canada was definitely thanked. And then he committed troops to Afghanistan to help out, and I mean, that was a very controversial act at the time, still relatively is, but I mean, Canadians have done their part. But for me, a lot of it stands up is that he stood up to the Americans when they said, all right, we're going into Iraq. And Chrétien said no. And he did not commit Canada into that quagmire that is Iraq. And I think that'll be a long-standing pro as his legacy continues on. The fact that Canada did not get stuck into this thing that has just become increasingly unpopular amongst, well, everyone.
Making autonomous foreign and defense policy choices is important, and our biggest ally is definitely the United States. So to be able to stand up and be like, it's not what's right for us. Yeah. We're still on your side, and we're still great allies, and we're still close, but it's not right for us. That's
great
good
politics.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And he's close friends with Bill Clinton, so if Jean Chrétien and Bill Clinton ever do like a charity thing and say, hey, round of golf, you and a guest with me and Bill Clinton, that's going to go for like $10 million.
Oh, yeah.
Because that would be the greatest round of golf.
That would be hilarious.
Ever. I don't have $10 million, but I will be the guest for whoever pays $10 million.
We can all chip in.
There you go, yeah.
Is that an idea there? So put it out on the...
Jean Chrétien, if you're listening.
Let's raise money for the history department.
Yeah, call up Bill Clinton, and that's
charity.
a good idea.
For charity.
So, that's our first round. So the first round went, I picked William Lyon Mackenzie King, Mike had Laurier, Aaron has Pierre Trudeau, Pat has Jean Chrétien. So there's your 4 prime ministers off the board. Round 2, snake draft. Pat gets the back-to-back pick here.
So this time, I will stay in the French-Canadian side. This prime minister who had the difficulty of leading Canada in the new world of post-World War II. Extremely important challenge.
Mike is mad.
No, I hate this guy. I don't want him.
I'm glad that Mike's mad and that I'm not, because you might have been out for revenge on me.
That's exactly how it is.
All right.
And he's a very important prime minister for the development of communications, with the development of the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway. It's also extremely important in international affairs, with Canada's entrance into NATO, went hand in hand with the UN support in the Korean War. But most importantly, in the Suez Crisis, which the aftermath really developed an important part of the Canadian identity on the international level to this day, just development of peacekeeping with Lester B. Pearson. Also, and again, this is the funny side, he was mentioned in The Simpsons when Martin drew a picture of him with President Dwight Eisenhower, commenting that their relationship was, and I quote, frosty at best. So this is my pick, Louis Saint Laurent.
Solid. I think that's a solid pick.
Great pick. That was my second.
It's a great pick.
Was my second choice.
Yeah. I had him as a first rounder. I think that's a solid pick.
I had him as a solid second rounder.
Yeah.
He was hardworking, businesslike, like Bennett, but infinitely more personable, successful.
Yeah.
He was. It's true. He presided over a very prosperous time. Some people might say that he sort of had it easy with the economic situation that he inherited, but no, like he was a master of foreign diplomacy, intelligent, trustworthy. And I like the quote that his principal aide, Jacques Pickersgill, said that Saint Laurent had made governing Canada look so easy that the people thought anyone could do it. I agree sort of with that quote. I mean, he made it look easy.
Yeah. Well, he was the first prime minister who had to deal with television. Yeah. And going on television and presenting that persona, and presenting sort of a media image to people, and he really did a good job with that. Also, personally, I enjoy that he was able to pay back all the debts from the First World War, the Depression, and the Second World War.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he tackled these post-World War II issues really well. Again, even though people have said that, he hadn't made it easy, the economic situation was going good for him as opposed to, let's say, Bennett. But no, it's still the reconstruction and tackling those issues and the conflicts, the growing Cold War, etc. Wonderful job.
And he also had to balance some complex stuff in the Cold War. Canada's moving to closer alliances in terms of defense and security with the United States. Some people think that the closer ties with the States in terms of both defense and economics is going to sort of pave the way for American takeover of Canadian culture. But Canada didn't have the ability to go it alone in terms of their own defense. They didn't have the ability to go it alone in terms of their sort of economic situation. So he had to balance these two difficult contradictions of being closer to the United States but maintaining the autonomy. People want the benefits that come with being closer with the United States but without actually being close to the U.S. So it's tricky stuff, and he did a great job.
And also on the more concrete level, just balancing the fact that Canada would enter into a defensive alliance and also promoting peacekeeping. Those two completely different,
opposing ideas,
completely opposing ideas and concepts. Really, what shaped Canadian identity in terms of foreign relations for the decades to come, even until today. We still do that with participation in Afghanistan as part of the defense force, but still being there somewhere else as part of peacekeeping force.
Finding Canada's place as sort of the middle power, which
not being the aggressor or rush head on into wars, rather take a more smart approach.
It set the tone for a lot of the values that Canadians hold really dear today. The blue helmet sort of idea and all that stuff. I mean,
I really like the fact that Mike talked about the one aspect, of course, is that getting closer with the Americans, but at the same time keeping Canadian autonomy. For me, I see this as a time where Canada was moving away from the British Empire, and about time. Canada needed to move away from the shadow of Britain. Canada was should have been completely autonomous by this point, in my opinion. Canadian people had showed a willingness and a resolve to get everything done. And so Saint Laurent clearly moved Canada away from the Empire and into a more North American role, which it should have achieved sooner. It was under Saint Laurent that the Supreme Court became the highest court in the land, replacing the JCPC in 1949. He advised Queen Elizabeth II to appoint Vincent Massey as the Governor General, continuing Canada's
moment of sort of promoting Canadian economy.
Exactly. Move Canada away from the Empire. And so I think under Saint Laurent, he did a great job, again, as we see, of going that middle ground. I think that's a perfect point, is that, looking at the Americans as a superpower, this British as an old waning superpower, but Canada is separating itself from both, forging this Canadian identity that is North American and Canadian in aspect and in ideology. And I think that was just great.
First companion of the Order of Canada as well.
So everyone seems to have something good to say about it. I haven't heard anyone with any negative comments.
Again,
we all seem to be. I'm surprised this guy didn't go first for everybody.
I had him in the first round easily, so I'm surprised that he made it through the first round, to be honest with you, especially the way we're all talking. And also, first Prime Minister to deal with Queen Elizabeth. And given my unending adoration of Queen Elizabeth, I am quite jealous of that. So, we will move on to the sixth overall pick, second pick of round number 2, and that snakes back to Aaron Boyce.
Okay, this one's a little tough because I still have a pick left from my first round. I thought for sure all four first rounders would have been gone.
Yeah.
Now, I will say it is a bit of a caution. I mean, when you're picking a fantasy team, you don't want to have 2 stars butting for the spotlight or something like that.
Yeah, who's going to take the last shot?
Exactly, but I think if I can get them to work together, put them towards this common goal, I think we'll be all right. And with this personality, I think it's absolutely a possibility. He needs an introduction for this radio podcast, but he really doesn't need one overall. He was known in Canadian politics for years and years and years and years and years, did tons of stuff for Canada. Canada's first prime minister. I mean, what can you say about him? He was largely responsible for bringing the disparate British colonies together, wrapped the Canadian nation together using the CPR, united so many people together. He was a huge polarizing figure, no doubt. I think back in the time, you either loved him or you hated him. I think just like Pierre Trudeau, he was that polarizing figure. I mean, he almost had a bit of a celebrity status as well about him. Even back in the 19th century, people loved to tell jokes about this guy and loved to go and hang out with him. I mean, he's got so many anecdotes and whatnot. I've got listed here, he's known for his personal charm and his anecdotes. And for me, I think to go out, grab a beer with this guy, sit down and hear...
He was a bit of a drunk.
That's the only... Okay, sorry.
One.
Sorry.
Stop it at one.
Barrels.
Sorry. Multiple beers here. I guess I'll drop the name, of course. We're talking about Sir John A. Macdonald.
Johnny Mac.
I had him as number 2. Like, I'm surprised he's made
This
it
is the
this
surprising
long.
one. I would have thought he would have been top 3.
That's what I mean. My first round.
For you guys, I thought... Because, I mean, I was going with Laurier first, but I thought it was going to be Trudeau, John A., and King.
I thought that was top 3 easy.
I thought that was
Yeah.
easy
Yeah.
top 3.
I'm
So it's a little
surprised.
surprising that he's gone
Well, that's what I mean.
in the second round.
My first round picks were, I had Pierre Trudeau at top. My second pick was going to be Laurier. Third, Mackenzie King. And then fourth, Johnny Macdonald.
Yeah.
The fact that he was left over at the first round, that's to me, I had to
Surprised.
take him.
Yeah, especially for the first prime minister.
Now,
Exactly.
there is the bad part.
Oh, there's
You have-
many.
Well, so you have the Pacific scandal, and then
Yeah.
when he, in 1873, prorogues Parliament so that they don't table the report on the Pacific scandal. I mean, could you imagine if today somebody prorogued Parliament so that something politically bad didn't happen to them? Oh my God, what a scandal it would be. So you have that, which is a negative thing. Thank God we've overcome those terrible times.
But
in
overall, though, I
Canadian
mean, this
history.
guy, he was a visionary.
Yeah.
He's balancing the different regions. I don't think Canada's... It's not a natural union. It took
Not
a
at all.
lot of work and a lot of vision and a lot of guts to stick with putting Confederation together. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't take anything away from him.
I'd have him more influential or doing a better job before Confederation than after. Getting
That's
together
a-
with George Brown, creating this coalition, going to Charlottetown.
It's a tough thing when you're looking at these guys because a lot of these guys, you look at their resume and their credentials, the stuff that you like seems to often be what they did before becoming to prime minister. And
Right.
sort of, it's do you take that into account or do you just take them as prime ministers
Sure.
and stuff? So I do agree with you that some of the better stuff was probably before being prime
Yeah.
minister.
Frankly, I think it's a really gutsy move when you look at like he resigns because of the Pacific scandal, and then he
came
becomes
back.
prime minister again. And in 1891, he talks about being like the old chieftain and restoring honor and stuff. I'm like, wait a minute, you resign
Well,
in a bribery scandal.
Because people forget quickly.
Clearly,
But that's the thing about Johnny Macdonald. He was the master politician. He could spin something like nobody else could. He could sell you anything and make it sound like the greatest deal ever because he knew the game. He
Yeah.
knew how to play it so well. He knew how to get his opponents to stumble. He knew how to get his supporters to back him up. You don't
Political
stay in
skill
office.
is definitely great, and something we didn't talk about actually with King. I mean, the whole King Bing affair. I
Yeah.
think that showed all kinds of crazy political skill.
Yeah.
I mean, to sort of maneuver things the way he did is incredible. So
Oh, yeah.
I want to shout back out to that in terms of
King Bing
if we're
affair.
going on, if we're going to be talking about sort of political savviness.
Oh, no, absolutely, and that's what I mean. I've got mad respect for Johnny Macdonald. Again, I mean, he's got a bunch of flaws, but I mean, who doesn't? But it just for me, it comes back to this dominant personality. But at the same time, he was dominant politically, but he could be, he was very friendly. He was very charming. He, as I said before, so many anecdotes about him. I think one of my favorites is the time where Darcy McGee walked into Parliament drunk. And McDonald goes up to him and says, "Parliament, there's only room in Parliament for one drunk, and that's me." I mean, the guy just knew what he was doing. So,
well, it was interesting though. In the podcast that I did with Craig Heron back in the summer, he talked about how at the time McDonald wouldn't have been considered an over drinker. That he was sort of just par for the course, and that they had cabinet meetings in taverns wasn't really a big deal because that's just what people did at the time. So it's sort of been played up a little bit through history, but the fact that his flask is on display at the Civ Museum. I think that's really an amazing thing, that part of his life has been played up so much. We move on now. It has snaked back to the second round pick for Michael Thompson.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I got two guys here who I'm debating over, and even now, as I'm looking at them, I'm trying to think of what I want to do. There's a guy on here who started out kind of low on my list. As I sort of did my research and I thought about it, kept moving up the list a little bit more. I'm going to take the route that might be a little bit more controversial. Maybe a little surprising to be going 6th, I think. This is a guy who achieved 2 consecutive majority governments. The first, I think, in 100 years. Had great vision of what he wanted to achieve for Canada. Made major policy moves economically. Attempted to make major policy moves constitutionally. He was his own undoing. Lots of people didn't share his vision. The constitutional issues that he addressed, which were to unite Canada, is ironically what prevented it from coming to reality. Good working relationship with the U.S. president at the time. He's been seen as an admiral diplomat. One U.S. president has noted that his example shows that it's possible to be a strong leader for Canada as well as a friend of the United States. He stood for a lot of positive values in Canada, I think. Opposed apartheid, made an official apology to the way Japanese Canadians were treated. Environment was a key focus. I'm going with Mulroney, number 6.
Too high.
I agree.
Too high.
Actually, he wasn't on my picks.
You didn't have him top 16?
I didn't have him top 16
wow.
for me. No.
I had him top 16. That's way too high.
He remained a very important figure for 8.
Influential figure, no doubt, but
influential figure, great vision.
He's not a second rounder.
No.
There you go.
I would have said a 3rd rounder.
Controversial, but I'm going for it. Taking him.
Well, no, actually, I will just say, I'm going to support Mike's pick there because it makes his team weaker. And so it improves everyone else's chances, so I'm okay with it. So I'll just put that out there.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think it's just way too high.
Okay.
I think his voice mesmerized you. That's the thing.
His voice?
Yeah, his
voice.
very deep.
His chin.
With his chin, too.
I'll just say GST.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, and it's still here. It's still around. Well, I mean, it's now HST around here.
Yeah.
But it was supposed to be a temporary measure.
So his economic initiatives, they transformed Canada for sure. Lots of people don't think they transformed for the better. Free trade agreement with the United States, but still here.
No, I will give you apartheid. I will give you standing against the U.S. intervention in Nicaragua and the treaty with the United States on acid rain. I will give you those things.
Well, I'll give you the idea of trying to get every participant of this country to bring in. I mean, or as he said it at the time, bring Quebec into the Constitution. I mean, that is a good idea. You don't want a province sitting out, but that's the thing.
He tried really hard.
He did, but the thing about how he went about it was just the wrong way. I mean, we're still dealing with this issue, obviously, now 30 years later, so what is the right way? I mean, that's far beyond my grasp, but the fact, I think he just went about it the wrong way.
Yeah. And how can you say you want to bring everybody in and then 2 days before the conference say to the territories, oh, no, don't worry about it. We don't show up. Like, what? If you want everybody involved, have everybody involved. Also...
He's really passionate about this one, eh?
I really am.
Yeah.
I have,
really passionate.
I have him in my top 16. That's way too high. And
where did you have him on your list? At number 16?
I have him as a 4th rounder. No, I have
just somewhere...
I have him at between 12 and 16.
Somewhere in the 4th round.
Yeah. Because there is some redeeming value, and because we've had prime ministers who have been there for 2 weeks, that's why I have him in the top 16. You also have, after he retires or says he's going to resign in 1993, spends a whole crap load of money going around the world saying goodbye to everybody without actually doing any formal work. And Kim Campbell doesn't get to move into 24 Sussex because his house in Montreal isn't built yet and he doesn't move out. What?
That is a burn.
Your rationales are getting better.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
That is a burn.
Now, okay, and now here,
The thing is, I mean, we're not going over our rationales now. We're saving that for later. But everyone has...
You have a strategy. This is part of the strategy.
There's different rationales, and there's different ways to approach these people. And apparently yours is...
to pick good people.
Apparently yours is moving arrangements. And but that's fine.
I think
that's fine. I'm looking for...
I think that's just a sign of jerkiness now.
I took somebody that doesn't take someone... sort of that you wanted, so...
Correct.
You're taking one of his
you need to break it down. Let's get the... Your head is turning a little red.
No.
You gotta take a breath.
Yes. So I have the number 8 pick. My number 3 pick still on the board. I'm very thrilled about this. He was overseas in World War I. Got sent home because of injuries. Historian, taught history at the University of Toronto, so that gets us a shout-out. Nobel Peace Prize, Suez Crisis, and without ever having a majority, passed legislation bringing us universal health care, the Canada Pension Plan, Canada Student Loans, the 40-hour work week, a new minimum wage, and the Order of Canada, and had designed the flag that should have been the flag. I'm taking Lester Pearson.
Yeah, surprising. That's who I was debating with Mulroney. I was kind of thinking Mulroney or Pearson, but as we said a little bit earlier, I think for a lot of what stands out for Pearson is sort of before Prime Minister. I know I'm not taking. I mean, he did lots of great stuff as Prime Minister. You just named a whole bunch of them, but I have to say he's a mixed bag, man. His government was seen as disorganized, criticized for lots of scandals. Political partisanship was at like its highest ever.
Did you say scandals and partisanship to me when you just picked Brian Mulroney
and
the Schreiber thing?
Yeah. Okay, I'm saying nobody's perfect, but I'm saying both of them for me, they were both a mixed bag. It could have gone 6-7 for me or 7-6. I don't know. I like the flag is great, but maybe it was political deflection for some of the other stuff. For the other stuff that was going on. I think it's a real mixed bag. It's a good choice. It was my other choice.
Yeah. Well, I agree as well. I think Lester Pearson is a perfect second round pick. I don't doubt that at all. Going back to Mike's point a little bit is that, I mean, you can make the argument that he was a much better diplomat, he was a much better civil servant than he was a prime minister. I mean, yeah, he was in there with two minority governments. I mean, what does that say for leadership? Oftentimes, majorities are won based on the strength of leadership. But I mean, Lester Pearson, yeah, he got a lot done, but he was not the kind of guy to kind of put his neck out on the line or anything like that.
Did he flip-flop on nuclear policy? I mean, we want nukes, we don't want nukes, we do want nukes. This is what's happening with Diefenbaker, so we'll just take the opposite stance. We'll get him out. The 60 days of decision to bring efficiency to government accomplished nothing. Nothing happened. And so, going back to sort of these last two picks, people disagreed with Mulroney, and you can disagree with sort of his policies. At least he was firm. He had strong vision. He knew what he wanted to do, the way he wanted to take Canada, and not everyone agreed with it. I think Pearson is sort of a confused sort of prime ministership.
I just don't see him as
he was my next one in line.
Yeah, but that's why I put him as a second rounder. I mean, he's not going to be the captain of your team. I mean, he's not going to be that leadership. You don't want his face out there as being the hallmark of your team.
I will also say, which again, totally biased for me, he's in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, which I enjoy. Yeah, he served as the honorary president. Honorary president of the Expos from 1969 to 1972.
You will appreciate this one. There's a quote of Lester Pearson saying that he would rather have played for the Toronto Maple Leafs than have served as Prime Minister of Canada. I mean, anyone that supports the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm a fan of, because I got to give a shout out.
It's the only sport you'll get.
You are a big sports fan, John, and he was sort of the most athletic of any of the Prime Ministers. I mean, he played every sport: tennis and hockey. Great baseball player, basketball.
So round two, let's summarize it real quick. Pat took Louis St. Laurent, Aaron took Johnny McDonald, Mike took Mulroney, and I took Pearson. Round three, I get the first pick in round three, the 9th overall pick in the draft. And I got to tell you right now, I am extraordinarily torn as to what I want to do. Yeah, I'm just going to go with my gut. I'm going to go with the guy who personally funded the Conservative Party for the latter part of the 1920s. Guy who completely changed the way politics and political campaigning was done with his use of radio in 1930. A guy who tried to enlist in the First World War at age 44. Brought the New Deal to Canada, went to Britain, became a Lord in the House of Lords, passed the first legislation bringing public broadcasting to Canada. I'm taking R.B. Bennett. There's a guy above him on my board, but I'm going down because I really want.
I am not surprised that you're going with Bennett, because you love Bennett.
I don't find him overly inspiring. He's cold, stern, unsympathetic.
Yes.
I think he's a hard worker.
Definitely true.
New Deal didn't really amount to that much.
Unconstitutional. It's great.
I don't know. I see him as the.
I'm low on my list.
He makes me say, "What were you thinking?" At some point, he's that kind of guy to me. He's extremely wealthy and had no problem showing it to everybody, while everybody was having trouble dealing with.
Yeah, but but if someone sent him a letter saying, "Hey, I'm struggling," he would send him a few bucks.
Yeah, he would.
Back in the mail
From his own money.
Yes.
From his own
pocket. Yeah. And he seriously, he was the Conservative Party after he was elected leader in 1927. He funded the whole thing through the 1930 election.
He definitely got.
He saved the party.
Yeah. a raw deal sort of being elected when he did.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
It's so hard to say,
about
to criticize or not criticize. I mean, how can you know how anybody else would have handled the Great Depression?
Well, it'd be like, the what-ifs of history, of course, are great questions asked. It'd be like, let's say, because we all agree that Louis Saint Laurent did such a great job, but we also agreed that he was in a time of economic prosperity. What would have happened is, say, if you transplanted someone like Louis Saint Laurent into 1930, when the country's economy just tanked.
Struggling, yeah.
I mean, exactly. What do you do with that? It's so ridiculously hard.
Yeah, and I will also say, I read the book, the P.B. Waite book, about R.B. Bennett, and he really personalized the guy. Right now we think of him as this austere millionaire who was very detached, but the book really presents him as a human being, and he had this one love affair, and when the woman broke it off with him, he was devastated.
It's not a human being fantasy draft. It's a prime minister fantasy draft.
I got to take the whole thing into account.
You got to take the whole thing
and now that I have King and Bennett on my team, like those two guys hated each other. This is going to create drama. It's going to be a great reality show. It's going to be amazing.
But going back to Bennett for a moment, I also had him in my third round, despite the criticisms you and I had talked about previously a little while ago.
I think I have him in my second round.
I had him in my third because Bennett was not one of those guys I had even thought of at first. I mean, then when I started doing a little bit more research into this, I thought, he was kind of one of these guys. He was a character guy. Again, we already said he was a hard-working individual. He was truly touched by the plight of the average Canadian during the Depression. He often stayed up late responding to personal correspondence and whatnot. So he was a really good character guy. But for me, I don't know how much of a slight this is against him, but he's the only prime minister not to be buried in Canada.
Yes.
And for me, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, if you're going to be
de
facto leader of the political thing like that, I mean, to be buried, yes, he's buried in the UK, but I think he should be here in Canada.
But it's not like we have these great monuments to dead prime ministers. Most of them have very average tombstones. It's like we have this whole thing where people go to visit them or anything. So I don't think that's a huge deal. The only my big negative on him is the On to Ottawa trek and sending the RCMP against the protesters in Regina and leading to the Regina riot. So I have Bennett. We move down now. Pick number 10 goes back to Mike.
I'm a little torn on this one too. I got two guys here that I'm debating with between could be another controversial one. I'm going with a guy where victory was everything. It's all that mattered. Was willing to do anything to achieve it. He sacrificed a lot for victory. He sacrificed unity, rural concerns, workers' needs. Canada was pretty divided. Was wounded when he left, but much came from his effort and the effort of Canadians under him. He and the period of Canada under him was a key to shedding our colonial status. I'm going with the war leader, Borden.
That's the other guy who I was debating.
Yeah, he was my last second rounder guy that I.
Yeah, I have him at 7. Yeah. I really do.
Yeah.
I think solid choice.
Yeah,
solid. You can quibble on conscription, right? That's really your big thing, right?
Yeah, that's the big controversy is conscription, but
come on, women's vote.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Establish a National Research Council.
For me, it's like one of the big ones is world affairs. I mean, he was crucial in transforming Canada's role within the British Empire, but not just Canada. The sort of establishing the Commonwealth, Resolution 9, which was important for all of the other Australia, etc. I mean, he sort of led the way into sort of shedding that colonial status, and he knew and realized, as all Canadians did, the huge sacrifice in blood and manpower that Canada paid, and he stood up for Canada and said, "We're owed something because of that." And that's another one. It's hard to talk about how people would have reacted in that situation. In hindsight, it's 2020. There was no other war before World War I like World War I. It was the first time. You can start to compare with how King dealt with World War II, but Borden had to deal with a situation that was completely unprecedented.
And Canada was still a very young nation at the time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's a major challenge.
And the whole conscription thing, I mean, we're still, it's not that era where we're closer to the U.S., we're still very imperial. You have a lot of the English-speaking people wanted conscription, and it was a really difficult thing to sort of have to make the decision. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a pretty admirable job.
I think better on foreign policy than domestic.
Yeah,
right?
I can see that.
Well, and only because his foreign policy was the
that's what
thing
he did.
to focus. Exactly. You had to. Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of hard to not. Yeah. It's kind of hard to focus on internal policies when you're fighting a war.
And that's what I'm saying. How much he had to sacrifice within Canada and within his own party for victory, which just
But
had to be done.
That's a problem with major conflicts. The internal policy for a country is so much tied to the foreign policy that you can't have both on the same.
Because you can look at things like he institutes like the sales or the income tax, which was supposed to be temporary, never gets repealed, and then in 1919 he sends troops against the strikers in Winnipeg, and he's scared of the Bolsheviks and all this stuff, and so you can see domestically that's where his flaws really show, but that probably does get overshadowed by the foreign policy and getting Canada through the war, I think. So I think that's a solid third round pick, 10th overall for Robert Borden.
I agree.
And now we move on. Back to Aaron Boyes, pick number 11.
So now I'm right into my third round. I'm a little torn here just looking at who I've left, but I think I've made a decision. And this is one of the guys that, at first, again, I didn't think I would actually pick him just because he's one of those guys who's often overlooked. We talked about his political opponent, or in fact, I spoke about his political opponent back in the 1870s. We talked about the Pacific Scandal, which helped this guy become prime minister. He was known as a man of great integrity. He despised political patronage, although he realized he had to play the political game. He was the lone prime minister of the time to reject the title, or of being knighted, and reject the title of Sir. He preferred to just keep it as his name as where he was. He was the prime minister who introduced the secret ballot in Canada. In fact, his political opponent, who I picked before, John A. Macdonald, called the secret ballot un-British, and so decided to outright reject it. But I mean, the secret ballot, as we all know, is huge. Created the Supreme Court of Canada. He's not one of the more famous guys, definitely not one of the higher-ups, I would say, but he was still an honorable and hardworking man, and because of that, I'm going to go with Alexander Mackenzie.
It's a good choice.
I like it.
That was my next one on my list. Solid, dependable, blue-collar roots, a stonemason.
Mason.
Yeah.
I love that
the
Governor General, the Earl of Dufferin, was distrustful of him because he was a stonemason. He felt he was too humble, from humble roots, to be prime minister.
Mentioned that he established the Royal Military College?
I didn't, but yes, he absolutely did.
There you go. That's another one.
And the Supreme Court, the Office of the Auditor General.
He wasn't like a great visionary, but I mean, when you start to list those accomplishments, they definitely add up.
And that was the thing for me. I've always known about Alexander Mackenzie, obviously following on the heels of Sir John A. And so oftentimes he's overlooked because obviously he's squeezed or sandwiched in between the two different mandates of Sir John A. Macdonald. But like I said, the more I looked into him, I got more and more respect for Alexander Mackenzie. Just what he represented. He was very clear about what he wanted and about how he was going to do it. And that takes a lot of integrity to stick to your principles, especially as a politician.
Alexander Mackenzie, a unanimous solid pick.
Solid pick.
Right there.
Perfect.
Final pick, round number 3. Mr. Fournier, back to you.
Okay, well, I will go with a very controversial pick, I am sure. And actually, I would never think I would have picked him due to very important personal dislike of this man, as he is our current prime minister. Whatever you dislike him for, he remains an extremely strong figure. Yep. And again, this is something I never thought I would say, but I admire this part of him, that he makes a decision, and you know what? His opponents, well, you don't like it, then deal with it. So yeah, he puts forward a lot of different ideas, and whatever happens, he will see them through.
But his idea, what are his ideas? Weak on the environment,
that's
great on human rights.
You will disagree with what Stephen Harper says, but
silencing the media.
So
he's strong on values, but whose values? Conservative values are Canada's values when less than 50% of the country voted for him.
He's imposing his values, his own values on Canada, which is, I don't really agree with that. But he's a strong figure. I include him on my team to balance the other two.
Christian and Louis Saint Laurent,
So
come back to the center a little bit.
So that's the thing. I choose him because he will put forth some pretty crazy ideas that will have the other two work to compromise. So in a discussion, he will be the brainstormer, and then the other will...
See, I respect your choice. I chose Mulroney, and sort of my argument is kind of the same. You don't always agree with his policies, but he was strong in his vision. Yeah. But talking about policies that...
Well, for me...
my team needed some controversy.
Environment,
for me,
Stephen
Harper was the hardest prime minister to categorize, simply for the fact that simply because he is the current prime minister, and a lot of the things that have been passed under his government now, especially the majority government, are still just starting to be initiated in the sense that they're still new. I mean, a lot of these other prime ministers, we can look back on what they did and say for certain that was a terrible idea, or for certain that was a fantastic idea, whereas these ones are still too young. We're so
but you know what, in the end, one of the reasons for my pick is that in 100 years people will talk about Stephen Harper, not always for good reasons, probably not for the good reasons, but they will still talk about him as a very important figure. If you want him on your team
as a politician, he is, I will admit, I'm not a huge Harper fan, but I will admit he is a great political strategist. Exactly. I mean, he is really good at playing the political game. So if you are putting together a team, you've got 4 guys and you want one guy who can do strategy, then sure.
But even for just sitting down with him and have a conversation, I want to find out why are you doing this?
Well, no, that's no.
What's your rationale for all this?
He's mind-boggling.
I could have a very, very long conversation with this man.
For him, he seems to me, when people talk to him one-on-one, he does kind of seem really relaxed and kind of willing to engage in conversation. If we're talking about the political satire and such, I mean, he's on the Mercer Report so many times, and he's willing to satirize himself and the party and whatnot.
He has no choice otherwise.
And the fact that the other thing that I like to bring up, it's funny. This morning I was reading is that Stephen Harper photobombed a wedding over the weekend. But the thing is that the bride and groom were both kind of surprised by it, but were thrilled to see it. The fact that he came out and shook everyone's hand and introduced himself. I mean, it makes him, he's willing to go out and do this kind of public things.
He knows how to.
And that's the thing.
He knows how to do it.
Someone as unpopular as him
can be so popular.
So popular. I don't get it. And this is one of the things I would like to find out is what the hell is going on.
And if anything goes wrong with your team, you can just blame everything on Pierre Poutine, right? So you have an easy out.
No, that's actually my other pick.
Is it too soon?
Too soon. But if you've ever seen the video with him and Yo-Yo Ma jamming at the NAC, I mean,
that's pretty cool.
Okay, and I'll also say this.
Harper really definitely loves the arts, doesn't he? Harper is a big fan of the arts.
Now, he's writing a book on hockey.
Yeah.
Which we can appreciate.
And he's a curling fan.
Oh. Like the only curling.
The grown.
For as much as you can say that's bad about Stephen Harper, and you can, this omnibus stuff and all this stuff, like, the thing that bothers me the most as somebody who, well, I shouldn't say it bothers me the most, but it really does bother me. And all politicians do this. All politicians with children under the age of 18, they use their kids as props. And it bugs me to no end. Like, you can't say, don't talk about my family has nothing to do with it, and then after a political speech, bring them on stage like props. Obama does it, Sarah Palin did it, Harper does it. Every politician who has ever run, at least in the last 30 years, who has children under the age of 18 does it, and it's despicable. At the last election, when they pulled his son up on stage after he won, like, the kid looks like he's, 14. I don't know how old he is. When I was 14, going through my, like, awkward gangly stage, the last thing I needed to do is to go up on stage with my father, be used as a prop to help his political, as I started it, and hopefully one day I'll come out of it. But, like, you just don't need that, and I hate it so much. Leave the kids at home. As soon as they're over it, like Mitt Romney's kids, fine. They're grown-ups, they can make their own choices. These kids don't have a choice, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. And it's the one thing about politics I cannot stand. Your family are not props. So, the third round is done. I picked Bennett. Mike has Borden. Aaron has Mackenzie. Pat took Harper. Fourth final round. This is, I think, where it gets really interesting. And Pat has the first pick of the fourth round.
So,
where do you go?
I will go. As I was saying, I have 4 strong-headed guys, but I think every team needs a fall guy.
Someone to take the heat.
Yeah. Who better than Joe Clark?
Joe Clark.
Come on.
All right,
wow.
man.
Yeah, poor guy. I mean, yeah, you need a fall guy. That's all I have to say about him.
Joe Clark is your fall guy.
Yeah, Joe Clark is my fall guy.
Youngest prime minister.
Youngest prime minister ever take office. 39
but couldn't hold on to power.
Yep. Vote of no confidence.
Yes. But also introduced the Freedom of Information Act.
Yep.
Which I think is a pretty big thing. It didn't pass while he was there, but it was introduced. He's got the ball rolling on that.
And then Pierre Trudeau, in fact, continued it with the follow-up when he became prime minister. Took basically the same ideas in Joe Clark's idea, but just passed it anyway. So I mean, Clark definitely got the ball rolling.
Also, if he lived, I love that I found this, that someone had done the math on this. If he lives until January 12th, 2014, he will be the Prime Minister with the longest retirement.
Beating Arthur Meehan.
Yes, which I think is kind of cool. Because I would very much like a long retirement.
Who wouldn't?
Exactly. So I think that's an accomplishment if you can do that. Also represented Yellowhead, Alberta. So a big shout out to all our listeners in Yellowhead.
Yeah,
I haven't blown this.
But again, I see. There's a rationale, I think, for my team.
One guy
that, you need a fall guy.
Yeah, that's a good
It's
reason.
important. I
You
think
put
it's
together a
important.
team.
You got to think of the whole team.
Yeah,
You got your Millhouse.
I guess. Yeah. I was okay. No, I'll keep that for later. But
All right, next pick, Aaron Boyes.
Oh man, this is tough because I mean I'm looking at my picks already. So I've got Pierre Trudeau, I've got Johnny MacDonald, and Alexander Mackenzie. Now I've got two guys sitting in the 19th, one in the 20th. And now my debate, of course, is do I take another guy from the 19th century and look really old and antiquated?
Yeah, but why does it matter when you're...
Or do I look into the 20th century to make sure that I kind of have, round it out a little bit? I'm getting the death stare from Mike right now, so I think I'm afraid
I'm just trying to understand the rationale of why that matters.
I'm wondering if I should stay away from the 19th century. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
A little strategy going on here.
That's one. Yeah. Now you got me really worried about what to do.
he's judging.
Okay. Well, what we'll do? I'm gonna go into the 20th century. This may come and bite me, but I'll do it anyway. I'm gonna take another conservative to help balance me out here. I've got 2 and 2. We talked about him a little bit before, but not in glowing lights. And I mean, I'm not even going to put him in a glowing light because a lot of his policies I'm totally against.
This is being voted on. Maybe you should try and put him in a glowing light.
Good point. But
do your best.
So he was an ardent imperialist. He was a supporter of the empire. At a time where Canada was moving away from the empire, he proposed removing trade with the United States and giving it more to the British. Despite, though, his love of Britain, I mean, he had good relations with the American president, well, at least one of them. And then following, in 1960, he had a terrible relationship with the U.S. president. But, I mean, again, it's tough to kind of balance those relationships. I think the one thing that stands out for me, though, and give respect to, is the institution of the Canadian Bill of Rights in 1960. I mean, this is a founding document that really set the stage for my first overall pick, Pierre Trudeau, as the basis for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I, of course, am talking about John the Chief, Diefenbaker.
That's who you want to make?
No, I would not even have drafted.
Yeah, no, he's not. He's not my.
He's not on my list.
I got him as my 4th rounder.
In addition to the Bill of Rights, I will also give you enfranchising Aboriginals in federal elections.
Sure,
I'll give you those.
Everyone has good points and bad points.
Yeah,
but
that's
what outweighs what else? I mean, huge majority win, sure, but it's just all. You know what? I'll even give him. I'll be nice and even kind of give him his first term. That's when the Bill of Rights was. Social services improvements there, cut taxes. But man, it fell apart quickly, and it fell apart bad. He was disliked abroad, especially by the U.S. Cancellation of the Arrow. So indecisive on the nuclear issue, which just that killed him. He's been criticized by allies as well as the military in Canada for not living up to their defense commitments. Seen as arrogant. He's been criticized as trusting nobody.
And nobody trusted him. Kennedy called him 2 hours before the Cuban Missile Crisis, before he made the speech, and said, hey, by the way.
Well, that's John
Couldn't even
Kennedy.
control sort of his own army during his own navy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They're going it alone.
But of all people, I thought for sure you'd appreciate the Western aspect that the guy was trying to do.
I'll tell you, I've been to the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, and they have a lovely little museum for him, and they have his burial site. But what makes me, why he's off my board, one of the strongest opponents of the CBC and public broadcasting. And since I have garnered my living for the last 5 years off of studying the CBC, I can't, in good conscience, support him in any way.
Well, that's why I kind of see him as a good 4th rounder. I mean, if we're looking for a goat or a scapegoat, he's my guy. I mean, my other 3, I think, were applauded with unanimous praise by you guys. So I'll take the one where if things go wrong or anything like that, or you need an aggressor or a guy to throw out on the ice for the last couple minutes or something like that, or to put in the penalty box just to sit there and not do anything. John Diefenbaker will be my guy.
Okay.
All right, we'll give you, if you win, I'm paying your tab with Diefenbucks.
No, as long as my meal gets paid for, I don't care how you pay for it.
All right, Mr. Thompson, your final pick.
All right, so
number 15 overall.
Looking at a lot of...
Well, your person's left, apparently.
There's actually a good number of people left. I mean, you got some people...
You got 8 guys, or 8 people to pick from. I shouldn't say guys.
You got... Yeah.
Some prime ministers not too experienced. Some people came to the job with enemies already. Do I want them on my team? Other people I have absolutely no points for. I think I'm going to go with somebody. I'm not sure how this will go over with you guys. This is a person who had to deal with some serious issues. They had to deal with religion as the main political issue due to the Manitoba school issue. They were dealing with issues Catholic versus Protestant, whether schools would be public or religious, whether French Canadians could go to school in the West in their own language. They had to deal and cope with some really divisive issues in Canada. They might have acted a little slow on them, but they were also concerned with the economic situation in Canada, negotiated free trade agreements, and I think this is one of the great what-if prime ministers. Died suddenly, collapsed, meeting the Queen. I'm going with John Thompson.
He was
Thompson's what?
Bias.
Thompson what?
Bias.
He was the guy who I was deliberating
Sir
about,
John
by the way.
Thompson.
I regret my pick now because I should have picked Sir John
After my
Thompson.
glowing speech of John
No,
Thompson.
because then you wouldn't have got him.
Oh, I see.
I'll tell you.
Hindsight being
You
2020.
want to
I'll tell you-
Interesting
block
strategy.
me.
I thought you were talking about somebody else.
I was
As you were
confused
saying
at
that.
first too.
He was the Minister of Justice during the 1885 Riel Rebellions.
Yes.
So I think that's maybe even more important than anything else he did, because that's a defining moment in Canadian history. So him being in charge of that,
Okay.
and whatever you think of the Riel Rebellions, I think that's in the first line of any article on it.
John Thompson was definitely, as I said, he was he was who I was debating between Deacon Baker and Thompson. But I think what got me away from Thompson is that, I mean, when you look at it, he really didn't do too much as Prime Minister. Granted, he was put in a very tough situation. I mean, Johnny MacDonald had died in 1891. John Abbott comes in as a caretaker Prime Minister, really didn't do anything. And then Thompson's thrust in this role, who's actually trying to organize the Conservative Party. But Mike,
But of the people who were left, none of them really accomplished that much.
But he didn't really.
But he's the more what-if prime minister than anyone else.
He could have been
I
the
think.
what-if prime minister, granted, but he just really didn't get anything done. And I mean, there was a lot of things that were just exaggerated. I mean, I'll put it out to my own research, looking at the annexationist threat. I mean, this guy truly believed that at any moment the United States was going to annex Canada, and
I don't think he did. I think maybe at first he was like, there was some concern, but I think he realized pretty early on that we're talking about a threat that wasn't really there. I'm not sure he was.
There's
like,
a
convinced.
secret file of the Justice Department
Convenient.
that was
Convenient
sent,
secret file.
that was sent right to Thompson himself.
I will also say I enjoy this. He dies, as you mentioned, in England at Windsor Castle, meeting the Queen.
Just collapsed.
Just drops dead. And to bring his remains back, they painted the HMS Blenheim black. They painted the whole ship black just to bring it back.
I didn't know that.
I think
that's a good anecdote. You are the master of the anecdotes.
I love these anecdotes. That was really all I was looking for.
He actually did more research than we did.
Yeah.
That was the only reason, for sure.
Also,
It'll hurt more when he loses to you.
Yeah,
at least amount of research.
Right. Appointed to the Nova Scotia Supreme Court in 1883 and was a key figure founding the Dalhousie Law School and briefly served as the Premier of Nova Scotia in 1882. So, I mean, he does have this career before being Prime Minister as well.
And he made one of his first major speeches during the Riel Rebellion while he was suffering kidney stones.
Hey,
Despite
toughen it out.
being sick with kidney stones,
I like that.
he gave a pretty great speech. So there you go. That's my fourth pick.
Despite my
Thompson.
criticism, I
Thompson
do agree.
and Thompson.
I do agree with you that it's a good fourth round pick.
Yeah.
I do agree.
So, I will go with my final pick. The final pick
16
of the Prime Minister's Fantasy Draft. And this person I had listed on my list as 12th.
Really?
So I'm excited that this person is still around. Another person from that same era, somebody who wasn't actually elected to be Prime Minister, actually wasn't even elected as a member of Parliament. He served as the Prime Minister from the Senate.
Oh
Only
no!
one of two.
Oh no!
Former Mayor of Montreal.
Oh man! I'm not surprised you're doing this, but I'm kind of surprised at the same time.
First Prime Minister born in North America.
Yep.
And the best quote to ever come out of a Prime Minister's mouth.
I hate politics.
I hate politics and what are considered their appropriate measures. I hate notoriety, public meetings, public speeches, caucuses, and everything I know of which is apparently the necessary incident of politics, except doing public work to the best of my abilities. I would so get along with this guy.
Yeah.
I love that quote. During his term, he was a Conservative, 52 by-elections in the country, 43 of which were won by the Conservatives. He increased his majority by 13 seats without an election I am taking, of course, Sir John Abbott.
All right.
I'm thrilled that he's there to be taken.
I'm thrilled that you're thrilled.
Like I said, I'm kind of surprised by this, but not at the same time.
He had a serious backlog of stuff to deal with after Donald left, right?
Yeah, he's taking. He considered himself a caretaker prime. He didn't want to do it.
No.
And everyone was like, "No, come on, do it."
He wanted John Thompson to do it.
Right
away.
And so he gets goaded into it, and he comes in and does a pretty good job. And honestly, I'm picking him for the quote.
Well, my thing against John Abbott, again, going back to this whole annexation thing, I mean, he was a signer of the Montreal Annexation Manifesto in 1849, clearly saying that he believed in it. And then his liberal opponents challenged him about it in the 1890s, and he just said, "Oh, it was just a youthful mistake." I mean, that's a little tough. I mean, I think it's one of those things that you kind of just say, "Oh, put it up to youth." It's kind of a scapegoat. I'm not a huge fan of it, but
yeah. Okay, so that completes the draft. Now let's go over real quick the forgotten prime minister.
Yeah.
There's a couple that I had listed in my top 16 who didn't get picked.
I was really close.
Yeah.
To taking, if it came to it,
yeah,
to Tupper.
Yeah, me
because
too.
Tupper had the best sideburns of any he looked like a wolf man. It was like Eddie Munster's sort of like all grown up man. The best sideburns of any prime minister. That's it right there.
And shortest term of all prime
shortest
ministers.
Term, yeah.
Shortest term,
to me,
longest sideburns.
To me, he's the Rudy of prime ministers. They put him in, and then whatever.
Also, the oldest guy to ever become prime minister, 74 years old.
And I mean, he lived an incredible long life. Yeah. I mean, he lasted ever. He was the last surviving father of Confederation, if you don't include Joey Smallwood later on.
Right. We don't.
Okay.
No, it's different, and it's nothing against Joey Smallwood, but when we think of, or at least when I think of fathers in Confederation, I think the group at Charlottetown. Yeah. And Joey Smallwood hadn't been born yet, so like
that's true.
That I don't mean it as a slight against Joey Smallwood. I just mean against
a slight against him for saying.
Yes, exactly. Also, as a shout out to my brother, Tupper was the minister of canals, railways and canals, and my brother loves canals. So there you go. And the other one who I had in my top 16 who wasn't picked was Mackenzie Bowell.
But why?
Why?
Because he has the biggest giggle factor of any prime minister.
What's your campaign slogan?
Join the Bowell movement.
I'm kind of surprised you didn't pick him. Because I thought for sure you'd just go, "What? Yeah. I'm picking him based on his name."
I think it's a solid name. But again, he didn't really do anything. He basically became prime minister because he was the senior most member of the cabinet when Thompson died, and they said, "Okay, you do it." And then he pretty much had a mutiny from his cabinet because of the Manitoba schools question. So
Meighen.
Arthur Meighen, yes.
I think the problem with Meighen is he inherited a bad... He came to the position with so many enemies already. I think he was hardworking and good small-town roots, but when he came, he had enemies in Labour, he had enemies in French Canada, he had political enemies, the economy was struggling... So
I
think he was doomed.
Well, after again another strong leader like Robert Borden, how do you follow up that success when you had such a dominant figure? And then
followed Mackenzie King too.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, he was stuck between Borden and then Mackenzie King.
He wasn't the great compromiser that Laurier was, which is one of the reasons I took him first. I mean, he was his principles were too strong to compromise on anything.
But you gotta love, like, he comes back in 41 as the leader of the Conservatives again. So I mean, he's a clearly devoted guy. So the next one who didn't get picked, Mr. John Turner.
It's just too short. He never had a chance to do anything to show what he was capable of. Another one of those what-if prime ministers.
I think you can also make the case that in the short time he was in office, he actually did a bad job. Like, Trudeau had made all these political appointments on his way out, and Turner comes in and has the chance to say, all right, this probably isn't a good idea. And rather than do that, he makes 70 more appointments that are completely partisan appointments. Presided over the worst finish of the Liberal Party ever until 2011.
Well, for me as well, he was not a sitting MP or a senator. So if he called Parliament, he would not have been able to speak on the floor as an MP. So, I mean, how are you supposed to do anything when you have to sit up in the press gallery and wait for the time for a public response, if there even is a chance for that? I mean,
also, here, another fun little anecdote about John Turner. Apparently, in 1965, he was in Barbados. Shout out to Barbados and all my people at the University of the West Indies. I was on vacation. He was staying at a hotel that was like next door to the hotel that John Diefenbaker happened to be staying at. It wasn't planned or anything. And John Diefenbaker was surfing and was struggling with the undertow and stuff. And John Turner was a competitive swimmer in university. Swam out and saved John Diefenbaker. which I think is kind of swell of him. Because
you need to publish the big book of Prime Minister anecdotes.
Prime Minister anecdotes.
Edited by
Patent pending.
Yeah. And his wife Jill is the great niece of John McCrae of In Flanders Field fame. The next Prime Minister who we did not draft, and I'll be honest, I'm surprised. I don't know if you guys are surprised. I had her in my top 16. Was Kim Campbell.
I didn't have Kim Campbell as one of my picks. Just again, didn't really get a chance to do anything. So it's tough to base on rating a prime minister for what they did if they really couldn't get a chance to do anything. And that was my rationale.
Too inexperienced.
My thing is just, again, the guys that had the short terms. I mean, Mackenzie Bowell, John Turner, Joe Clark even, just in the sense that they really didn't have a chance to do much is why I didn't have them in my picks.
I enjoy that she abandoned a doctoral degree in the 1970s. I can appreciate wanting to do that.
Understand
I can understand the rationale there.
No, absolutely.
But she wins her seat in 1988. She's immediately put into the cabinet as the Minister of Indian and Northern Development. Becomes Canada's first female Minister of Justice and the first Attorney General. Her approval rating when she got the job in the summer of 1993 was 51%. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, she's a lecturer. Went on to lecture at Harvard after being the Prime Minister, Consul General to Los Angeles. That's a pretty sweet gig.
Not very good public relations. I mean, she attack ad that basically mocked Chrétien's
palsy.
She says that she had nothing to do with it, though.
The Somalia affair happened under her watch. I mean, that's a huge strike against her. I mean, there are some people that even argue that the whole Somalia affair was covered up to sort of insulate her from that while she was running for party leadership. So that's not so good.
I would have had her in the fourth round.
Well, I would not have had her at all. She's actually last. She's number 22
I
on my
her
list.
as my follow.
22 as a fall girl.
Yeah.
The one thing that got me is when we're talking about bad luck. For Kim Campbell, she had no choice in the timing of the election. The 5-year term of the Conservatives was up. So there had to be,
before she called.
Exactly. So there had to be an election. So I mean, when you don't even have a chance to really do much before the term's about to expire. I mean, when you get to call the election on your terms, it immensely helps you.
At least you can try and sort of handle the election campaign itself. She did not handle her campaign.
I agree 100%. But again, but when we're talking about bad timing, bad luck, I mean, she experienced some bad luck as well. I mean, the Conservatives were getting hammered after Mulroney had left anyway. So.
And as I mentioned before, only a prime minister since 24 Sussex became the official residence to not get a chance to live there, which I feel bad for. Apparently it's a nice house.
Although it's breachable. I mean, you didn't mention the anecdote how somebody broke in while Chrétien was there.
Yes, I did not
mention
that.
And he locked himself in the room.
And he had like a...
He was ready to
fight.
a sharp...
An Inuit
native carving to protect himself with. He was ready with that carving. I can just imagine him in his nightcap with like a pointy soapstone carving.
His wife stepped in.
Last week, you asked John Chrétien about it now. I bet you he said, I hope he got it through that door. I was going to give it to him.
Headlocks in the left arm, and he's got makeshift weapons in the right arm. It's just...
And the final person who we need to talk about, who I had as number 22 on my list, was Paul Martin. I mean,
really not much to say about it.
I don't know what to say.
Good businessman.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He was Minister of Finance during a prosperous time, and good on him. But apparently, his relationship with Chrétien was just no good. And you know what? I mean, if his father had been a prime minister, then okay, I like that. I would rather have his father on the team than him. Like, his father did a lot of really good stuff in the 50s, and it's nothing really against them. He
started out opposed to same-sex marriage, but he ended up
in favor. So that's a positive. What the Kelowna Accord, you can put that in his favor.
Mm-hmm. The problem that I think with Martin and a lot of these other guys, and I'll point to Meighen as another example, is the guys who follow the great prime minister, and I'll use great in quotation marks, whether or not you agree that the strong, the big ones, these great prime ministers often leave a lot of destruction in their wake. Yeah. And the guys who have to come in after them and pick up the pieces get a really raw deal. And I think that happened with Martin. Had to deal with sort of a lot of the fallout from the way people perceived the Liberal government after Chrétien.
Sponsorship scandal.
Oh, yeah.
That falls all to him.
Meighen had a hard time sort of shedding the enemies that he made before he was prime minister as he was working in cabinet of a controversial prime minister. I mean, for some of these other people, the people that or undrafted. They just ended up coming at the tail end of sort of these big, strong prime ministers.
And they all did.
Yeah. So we'll go over the teams real quick. We can divulge now if any of us had any overarching strategy. So Pat has Jean Chrétien, Louis Saint Laurent, Stephen Harper, Joe Clark. What was your strategy? Do you have anything?
So my strategy was survival, trying to really get to grip with Canadian prime ministers, and I feel like I learned a lot because I didn't know. I knew pretty much nothing about them.
That's why you're the underdog.
No, I didn't really have much of a strategy other than try to balance it out a little bit and not have too strong a team again. Have to balance it out.
And you don't want a McGrady and a Vince Carter on the same team.
Exactly.
So next, Aaron, Pierre Trudeau, Sir John A. Macdonald, Alexander Mackenzie, John Diefenbaker.
That's actually a good team.
That's a well-rounded team. Yeah.
Well, my thought on it,
except for Diefenbaker.
Everyone has an except.
I don't.
We're getting to you. My strategy, I think I divulged it to Sean before we started recording this. I kind of went into it almost jokingly, like drafting for an NHL team. I mean, I wanted my top line center, and then I wanted a good solid third rounder, to grind it out. Alexander Mackenzie is your big grinder. I took Johnny McDonald in second round. I'm a little afraid because, again, on an NHL team and there's two superstars that they might compete for that first line position.
He's a franchise player. He's a big name that people recognize.
Exactly. That's the thing. But at the same time, when you have two guys competing for that top spot, whoever does take that top spot has to be really good, and it will drive your team forward.
Like a Malcolm Crosby situation.
Exactly. I mean, and let them support each other.
Not so much a Reimer Scrivens sort of thing.
No.
I thought we were talking about good people.
I thought we were talking about people competing for first spot.
I will say the Diefenbaker may be my undoing. I really hope it's not. I mean, he'll be my guy to kind of like to throw, shovel the bad stuff onto it if the other three didn't really do anything great. But I also wanted to try to balance it out for me between liberals and conservatives because I think it's one of those things that when you have a good balance of the thing, you can drive Canadian policy in a good direction instead of having it flare one way or the other. So that's kind of how I was going at it, but more so like an NHL draft.
Michael, Thompson, Wilfrid Laurier, Brian Mulroney, Robert Borden, John Thompson.
At first, my first strategy was logical way to think about it is whoever's face is on the highest denomination of currency is obviously the best. So I came into it thinking let's go Borden and King at the top, and maybe I'll draft the Blue Nose and a Beaver and a Maple Leaf at the end. But then, I thought that kind of didn't make any sense. So I did have a bit of a strategy, and I'll explain it here. It's kind of, I think it has come out a little bit throughout our entire discussion, and it comes from sort of two major issues are at work here. The first is that Canada is not a natural union. We're stitched together from different regions and languages, etc. So national unity is really important, but it's really difficult to achieve. Sometimes doing what you think is best for national unity doesn't sit well at the regional level, and sometimes trying to bring the regions into the fold for the purpose of national unity can actually have the opposite effect. And, I think the whole Meech Lake Mulrooney is an example of that. So there's this sort of natural contradiction between our regionalism and our national unity. The second major issue or contradiction is in the difficulty between promoting Canadian autonomy abroad, but having it needing to exist within the reality of our dependence on our alliances. Mm-hmm. So it took years of struggle and bloodshed to get Canada to emerge as an autonomous player on the international stage before we gained control over our foreign and our domestic policy. Same thing economically. It's really difficult to build a strong economy on a huge country with a small population completely on its own. So there's this struggle between being dependent on our friends and our allies, i.e. Britain and the US, in terms of defense and security and economy, but also trying to balance the natural reaction to sort of want to be autonomous and independent and not have to depend on these allies. So I was looking for a prime minister who could navigate those two natural contradictions which exist in the Canadian experience, who can gain power and hold power and has the tools and the vision. The prime ministers I have chosen are the ones who did the option I had the best at trying to navigate those two issues.
And so my team was William Lyon Mackenzie King, Pearson, R.B. Bennett, and Abbott. And I have a couple mindsets going in. One, I want people who I kind of like what they did in terms of legislation and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And even a guy like Bennett, starting public broadcasting, also the airline, I can support these things. I like this. Same with Abbott. I think he limited term. I think he did a fine job, and definitely the best quote ever. I'm also, frankly, in my head, I'm trying to put together what I think is a great reality show. So I want personalities who are going to be in conflict and would just make for an interesting dynamic. That's what I want. And I think William Lyon Mackenzie King and Bennett really did not like each other. Pearson and Abbott on opposite sides of the table, and I think had different ideas about the role of politics in Canadian life. So I think you get a nice mix there. And also, all four of them are not really scared to say what they think. Abbott with this great quote. Bennett was very open, and Mackenzie King had the 5-cent comment about Bennett or the Conservatives, saying I would never give a 5-cent piece to a Conservative government. He said this before the 1930 election, and that was capitalized on. And Pearson had the famous thing with Lyndon Johnson, where with the speech, and Lyndon Johnson grabbed him by the lapels and said, "You pissed on my rug." Like I want these people who are going to stir it up a little bit, and just it would make for an entertaining group. And that's why I have these four guys. I think large personalities who also did some good for the country. So that was my strategy going in, and I'm thrilled with my team, I have to say.
Me too. I'm pleased with my team.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Pat?
Sort of.
But again, and then sort of the fifth team here is Tupper, Bowell, Meagan, Turner, Campbell, Martin. And listeners, if
That's
you would like
the
to...
Mighty Ducks of... Although they win in the end, so maybe they're not the Mighty Ducks.
Well, wait, listen.
No, maybe they're like...
Yeah, I guess we shouldn't say.
No, they're like the Cleveland Indians during Major League. But you know what? No one believes in them. Maybe they can have a rally, but they're not going to win. They might finish ahead of one of us, and maybe it'll be me because I just said that. So the listeners can vote. We're going to put up a poll on the website. You can vote by emailing myself. You can email historyslam@gmail.com with a vote. You can also tweet your vote to me at Dr. Shawnee Fever. And we will compile the votes, and we will come back. We'll do a bit of a recap, like a short little thing with the four of us, and we'll recap and explain who won, and we will also determine where we are going for the winner's celebration. And if the 6 undrafted prime ministers win, then I don't know what we do.
We all hang our heads in shame.
We would be the failures, not those prime ministers.
Yeah.
That's true. That would
we
be
buy
that.
a case of beer and we drop in for him in front of Parliament.
Yeah, I actually like that idea. Yeah, pour it out. Yeah,
Pour it out the street.
In the
For like all
in
the
the
prime
fountain.
minister.
Just pour it out in the fountain.
An honorary sacrifice. I like that. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. I hope you had a good time, and we will reconvene in a couple of weeks. And again, if you want to get in touch with me at the podcast for any reason, historyslam@gmail.com, Twitter, Dr. Shawnee Fever, and if you're out and you see Enrico Palazzo, please say hi for me.
Thanks for listening to the History Slam podcast. Check out ActiveHistory.ca for more features and articles, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes.